Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Reimagining Performing Arts and Disability panel conversation this morning. My name is Marika Perro. I am the Arts Development Manager at Accessible Arts. Thank you all for joining us, and for those of you who are new to us, Accessible Arts is New South Wales' peak arts and disability organisation, advancing the rights of and opportunities for people with disability or who are deaf to have sustained professional careers in the arts in New South Wales. Before we begin today, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping items. The first one is that we have some accessible bathrooms here through the doorway. This is also our emergency exit. We also have additional bathrooms in the Western foyer. We have T-Hearing Loop available for today, so if anyone requires this or is having any issues, please raise your hand and our stage manager Nicole can come and assist you. Before we begin our panel conversation today, I would like to warmly welcome Daniel McDonald to commence our event with a welcome to country.
Thank you for watching me here today. I'm a member of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and my name is Daniel McDonald. I'm a Gadigal man and I'm representing here on Gadigal land today. I'm representing Gadigal people, Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people as well. I pay my respect from elders past and present. "50 years coming up for the Opera House, and it's continuing. It used to be a station here earlier. 50 years, wow. In October 1973, the 20th. I was born that year too. I would like to tell you about inclusion. As you can see, my art piece there is inclusion. Inclusion. People with disabilities are equal. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have hidden disability. People have hidden disabilities. So we all should be proud of people who have disabilities. Doesn't matter where they are, who they are and where they come from. We're here all on Gadigal land as one. I would like to wish you all a warm welcome here today and the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for that wonderful welcome to country and opening our event today. I would now like to introduce Liz Martin, Accessible Arts CEO, to begin our panel conversation.
Thank you, Marika. And thank you. I'd like to first begin by also acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to our first Access Ideas and Insights panel conversation for 2023. Today is the first of our hybrid event series where we have both an in-person audience here at the Sydney Opera House, as well as an accessible live stream broadcast delivered by our event partner, Pyrus. I'd like to thank Sydney Opera House for hosting this event, delivered by Accessible Arts, with the funding support of Create New South Wales and City of Sydney. Today we are joined by a dynamic lineup of performing arts professionals with disability who will each discuss their experiences in the performing arts sector. At the end of the panel, we will have some time for audience questions. For our online audience, these questions can be submitted via Slido, which is embedded to the right-hand side of your screen. For those using keyboard navigation, you will need to tab past the video controls to access it. Alternatively, you may submit spoken questions or questions in Auslan by messaging them to the Accessible Arts Facebook page. For our audience in the room, hello, and how wonderful to be back in person with you all after 3 years, perhaps. You may request a microphone to ask questions, or you may also use Slido on your phone by navigating to slido.com and entering the code ARTS, AARTS. Please know that we have a wonderful full audience today, so it is possible that we may not get to every answer of every question submitted, but we would love to see your questions coming through. And now to our panellists. First of all, I'd like to welcome Deborah Keenahan. Deborah is multidisciplinary artist working between video, performance, identity and social engagement. Her new work, Othering, has premiered this month as part of the 2023 Sydney Festival, and her work, Smashing, screened last year as part of Cannes Short Film Festival Independent Films. Deborah was the first participant to Accessible Arts Art Screen program, where she created her first screen-based work titled Little Things Matter. Among other things, Deborah is an author, playwright, psychologist and academic. Please welcome Deborah Keenahan. We are also joined this morning by Anthea Williams. Anthea is an established and award-winning theatre director. Her work aims to foreground marginalised experiences by creating space for new and diverse voices. She often works with radical dramaturgies in order to privilege the regulated or forgotten. Anthea is a Churchill Fellow and regularly writes about disability and representation for The Guardian Australia. Please welcome Anthea Williams. And finally, I'd like to also welcome Jamal Abdul. Jamal is a comedian who recently performed as part of Vivid Ideas and the Cowra Comedy Festival in 2022 with Are You Pulling My Leg?, a showcase of comedians with disability. He was the winner of the Stand Up and Be Counted comedy competition in 2017 and Raw comedy state finalist in 2018. Jamal has performed as part of the Sydney Comedy Festival and Melbourne International Comedy Festival and received great reviews. So to begin our conversation today, oh yes, please welcome Jamal.
Thanks, guys.
It's wonderful to be here with you three. I really appreciate your time. To begin our conversation today, I'd like to invite each panellist to introduce themselves and share some of their recent outcomes in this space of performing arts and disability. So Deborah, let's start with you. You are a multidisciplinary artist and have recently staged a new play titled Othering. Can you tell us about your creative practice and the overarching themes you explore in your latest performance?
Well, thank you very much, Liz, and thank you for having me here. Well, as regards my work, as you said in the introduction, I'm a multidiscipline artist. So I have done video, theatre, but also street performance as well. And also there was mention of the fact that I'm also a psychologist, so I have two strings to my bow. And people often say to me, well, that seems a bit disparate, being a psychologist and a visual artist. But actually, no, because as a psychologist in that work, my focus was on a phenomenon called dehumanisation. And I worked a lot around human rights and the ill treatment of people who are different. And part of the reason that I shifted from that very straight academic approach was that my experience of the arts is that they approach and engage a very, very broad spectrum of people. And so consequently, it became important to me to shift my work into an area that I engaged with people, a very broad spectrum of people, which the arts allows. And so I enjoy the act of engaging with people, and so hence performance became an important thing. But of course, when we went into COVID, then film became much more of a way of going, because as we know, the arts, and certainly performance arts, got hit quite hard. So for me, the arts are a very effective way of engaging people on very, very difficult subjects. And also, for me, I enjoy the multidiscipline way that the arts affords, because that, again, allows engagement with the broadest spectrum of people. And, it's the idea of actually dealing with what can be very difficult subjects, controversial subjects sometimes, in ways that, you can actually be imaginative, and it can be a process of enjoyment, even though the subjects may be difficult. So that's my thing.
Great. Thanks so much, Deborah. Jamal, you are a stand-up comedian, and I'm interested in how you came into comedy. Could you share a little bit about what attracted you to comedy, whether you had a choice, what makes you laugh, and what we can expect to experience in one of your stand-up shows?
Right. I guess what attracted me to stand-up was it was like a medium that I could enjoy pretty much just as much as like sighted people could. So much of stand-up comedy is auditory. So for me as a blind person, I kind of got to enjoy it just as much as sighted people were, obviously with the exception of act-outs. But for the most part, I just liked going to stand-up shows. And I had a good friend of mine that we lived in a small country town on the south coast called Bomaderry, and we would go up to Wollongong to watch these comedy shows once a fortnight. And I loved it. I thought it was awesome. I never saw myself doing it. I just thought it was magic. I was like, I never even considered giving it a try until I went to an open mic night, which is a completely different caliber of performance compared to like a real comedy club. And it completely demystified it for me. I was like, wow, this is how it starts? Like, this is terrible. I can be just as bad as this, right? And so, but there were a handful of performers that were on at this particular open mic night that were incredibly impactful. And one of them, one of them was, because anyone can sign up to these, right? Like anyone off the street can see comedy, written on a chalkboard and then sign up and just perform for 5 minutes and then leave. Like these shows are crazy, And one night I went to one of the open mic nights in Wollongong. They just started up. And I was watching a show, and one of the performers was a prostitute, right? She was a sex worker, and she told her stories about her work, and it was insane. Like, it was the most insane thing ever, and everybody, in the room, laughed and whatever it was, and just this idea that this person could be so free with what she wanted to say and tell her story. With zero consequences, and then hang out with everybody afterwards was awesome. I was like, it's like a forgiving art form, you know what I mean? Like, you can make these mistakes and it'd still be okay, or whatever it was, And a couple of other performers, one of my friends, who wasn't my friend at the time, he's just a guy that was on the show. His name's Oliver Hunter. He's got cerebral palsy, and he uses a wheelchair, and he also signed up for this night and told his stories. So in this one night, I had this broad spectrum of what comedy had to offer. And so I was like, all right, so, you know, you can make mistakes, you can do well, you can do poorly, and comedy will forgive you. And it was so open-minded that it's going to have, you know, everyone from like a sex worker to Oliver Hunter who's in a wheelchair. I thought, all right, I'm going to give this a try. I just thought it was completely like anything else I'd ever seen. So yeah, that's what attracted me to it. I just thought, this is I want to give this a go. And I thought I'd do it one time and it'd be a bucket list thing. And I loved it. I was signing up to open mics immediately in Sydney, and yeah, it just snowballed from there. That was a couple of years ago now. So yeah, that's what kind of drew me towards it. I guess if you come to my shows, you'll hear me talk about all kinds of things. Like the things that make me laugh the most are people. I just think the human condition is hilarious. And just how flawed we are as people, whether it be like because of a disability or just because of an awful personality trait. You know, I think the worst people in society are the funniest. So that's the stuff I find funny. And yeah, that's what I'll talk about. Like I'll talk about like my interests, which is people and humanity and my own flaws and other people's flaws. And that's what I enjoy. That's what I think is funny.
Thanks, Jamal. And you're such a charming performer as well. I've seen you a few times now, and hilarious. And I can say that because I was one of those people that tried to do the mic sign up 5-minute thing. And
Right.
I bombed so badly. I was terrible. It is a magic art, comedy.
Yeah.
It's one thing to make jokes on the side to a mate, and it's different to work a room like you do. So it's amazing.
My first show, I bombed horribly as well. So, and
Well, that's reassuring.
Yeah, I did really badly, and I have no idea why I did it again. There was absolutely no reason for me to do it a second time.
No encouragement there. And Anthea, you're an award-winning theatre director with many of your projects creating space for new and diverse voices. Can you give our audience some background into your career pathway and what your current projects look like?
Yeah, sure. So I started out in theatre and as a theatre director. And a lot of theatre directors, particularly in this country, are really admired when they do their unique version of a classic. But that wasn't actually of particular excitement to me. I love working with living writers. I love developing new stories. I think we just have so many issues and voices that we need to be privileging from people who are alive. And so that was always what excited me. And I moved around a lot in order to do that. So I started directing when I was at university at UNSW. I've just seen one of my old colleagues in the audience from Nuts back in the day. Then I went to VCA. And, you know, the thing about having a disability is it's really expensive. So unlike a lot of theatre directors, I couldn't just kind of work in a cafe and live on you know, noodles for years. So I moved to back to New Zealand, and I got a job there producing. But I was really strategic about it because it was a place that had worked with the Royal Court in London. And so the Royal Court, the New York Times refers to the Royal Court as the most important theatre in Europe. I don't know if that's true, but in terms of new writing, it's a real powerhouse. And that kind of allowed me to make connections over in the UK, so I ended up moving there for a significant period of time, and I worked as an associate director at a theatre company called The Bush there. And I moved back because I got a role at Belvoir. So I worked at Belvoir for 7 years as their associate director new work. And all the time looking at how I could really broaden out who was invited into those spaces. You know, I think I love making theatre. I love the process of working with live humans. So often my work is telling the story of the people who are involved in it. You know, recently I did a project with Nancy Dene at the at Darlinghurst Theatre, which was her story. I helped Nakia Louie. I directed a Nakia Louie work where she talked about the death of her grandmother. I did a work with Omar Musa, which was partly stand-up spoken word poetry, I mean partly rap, and very much his story. I really love working with people and supporting them to tell their stories publicly. But I also have started working in film. So, and it's been interesting because as I've worked into film, started moving into film, and as I've started writing, I've started working in areas where I'm telling more of my own story, because I used to very much be a facilitator for other people's stories, which I absolutely am. But and maybe also I'm a bit older and I've got a bit more to say. So I've made my first short. It's called Safety Net. If anyone wants to see it, you can see it on iView. I'm developing a feature on that same one with the writer of that work and the producer of that work. And the lead character in that is a 12-year-old boy who lives with disability. And it's been glorious to kind of talk about my own experience through the development of that feature as a young person who grew up with disability. In terms of what I've got coming up, so, features of features, you're like, well, when am I going to make it? When Toni Collette says yes, like when I get an amazing actress to go, yeah, I'd love to be in that. But the other works I have going on is I'm directing a beautiful work called Pony by a writer called Eloise Snape that's happening at Griffin in a couple of months. I really recommend you go and see that. That's been absolutely glorious to develop with Elo. It's her first play and it's so good, and it's been kind of nominated for every writing award, and she keeps on being so surprised, and I keep on saying, I told you this was really good, Elo, why are you surprised? And then I'm heading to Christchurch, New Zealand to direct a play back there. I do a little bit of directing in New Zealand as well. I've primarily been based in Australia since I was 18, but my family's from New Zealand, as you can probably tell from the accent. Kia ora. And then I'm coming back here to do a new musical for Riverside Theatres. And that is called The Hen House, and that's a beautiful work about migrant women who worked in factories out west, and the writers and makers of that work have based it on not their story but their grandmother's story. So I think I seem to be a director that people come to when they want to tell their story, and I really feel so humbled by that. I really enjoy that process, but that also means that you always have to go, well, what's the holistic way to do that? And how do we honour who you are in all your specificity as a human? Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anthea. We all know, I think, that live performance has had a very rough couple of years. The pandemic closed performance venues and theatres, and audiences were slow and cautious in returning. I'd love to hear from you how you navigated your careers through the pandemic and how you feel the performing arts space has changed in our post-pandemic world, can we say? Jamal, let's start with you. What were your pandemic experiences in terms of performing, and what has changed in comedy since returning to the stage?
The pandemic was not, it wasn't friendly to a lot of performing arts, but especially live arts. It was terrible, to be honest. It was quite grim. So for almost 2 years there, I rarely performed. So it was quite difficult to get out. Obviously, when the lockdowns were on, there was nothing, and even when there wasn't, it was still, shows were capped. It was quite limited. I had my own health concerns to take into consideration, so it wasn't particularly great throughout that period. And we had the advent of Zoom comedy shows, and I did a couple of them. Like, you have to do them, right? Like, it was like, all right, this is like a once in a lifetime thing. I've got to experience this, right? And I did one particular Zoom show. I had no idea how it was going to go. I started doing my act to my laptop. I just felt like it was the most alien thing ever. And so performing to my laptop, and it never feels good to bomb in the same room you're about to go to sleep in. You're just laying in your bed thinking that's where it happened, right there. It was awful. I remember I was on this call and doing my set, and then halfway through my set, someone's house phone rang. Who has a house phone? So I never thought I'd be heckled by home appliances, but that was the experience. Yeah, so I guess like a positive thing to come out of it though, like was like all these live streams. Like people started to really get into like live streaming, and like we're doing it today, and so I think it just made it more sort of in the social zeitgeist. Like this thing exists, we can do it, and it's been a good thing as far as like access goes. Now people can, you know, if they don't have a means to get out to shows, they can watch them from the comfort of their own home and things like that. But it's also in a weird way has made me double down on live entertainment. It's made me realize like how special, especially stand-up comedy is, the fact that it is live. Like I think stand-up is the most live art form there is. Like sitting at home and watching it through a live stream or on Netflix, like it's not the same. It's not the same as being in the room and that infectious laughter being all around you. Like it's all encompassing when you're at a live show. So it kind of made me think about access more in the live setting. Like I think more shows should be wheelchair accessible. Like obviously I'm stating the obvious here, but it's made me consider it more so. So like if I take on a festival, like I'm probably most likely to turn down a venue that people in a wheelchair can't get into, you know, or, you know, it's made me consider things like a hearing loop and Auslan interpreters and things like that. Because it's, I don't know, I think like stand-up comedy needs to be experienced live, and for it to be truly inclusive, you need to be able to get to the live show as much as is possible, I think. So that's how it's made me reconsider my art form, I think. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Jamal. And Anthea, what were your pandemic experiences in the theatre sector, and how has the performing arts space changed since?
Yeah, I think in some ways I probably had an easier time during the pandemic than a lot of theatre makers, and that's because I do a lot of development work. So Pony, that I was talking about before, that I'm doing at Griffin, we developed that while I was not only isolating, I was also in New Zealand with care responsibilities for my elderly parents. But suddenly it just became so apparent how much you can do on Zoom. And I really appreciated that. There are a lot of things I really hope we don't lose. And one of the things that I thought about the pandemic was it was a real leveller, because suddenly everyone was having to be honest about their situation and working from home and what their personal and family needs were. And I think we need to remember that. You know, I had one delightful meeting with Josipa and Mara, who are these gorgeous performers that I'm developing a musical with. I know them really well. I didn't know them quite as well then. And I was looking after my elderly father who has Alzheimer's. And I was on Zoom, and sometimes he forgets how old I am. So he came into the room. Mum had said to him, "Can you find out if Anthea's making dinner?" Because I was doing all of their cooking and cleaning, etc. during this time. And on the trip to the room, I think that had become, "Tell Anthea it's time for dinner." So he came in, patted me on the head like I was a kid, and said, "Come on, it's time for dinner. You've got to," and then he looked in the computer and said hello to the other women, and we all just laughed, and they looked at me and said, "Well, you have to go." And I just thought, this is great, because actually this is what my life is at the moment. I am caring for a mother with a physical disability. I'm caring for a father with Alzheimer's. I'm doing a huge amount of care work. I am also creating art. But I can't pretend that this doesn't all affect what my daily life is like. I can't pretend that I don't have these responsibilities. And actually, I think the world would be a much better, happier, calmer place if we were all just more honest about that stuff. I personally love it when I'm listening to Radio National and I hear a dog barking in the background. I love that. And in terms of theatre's response, I think in terms of access is very complex. And with access, people often think about wheelchair access and Auslan and hearing loops. But I'm just going to do a little plug, sorry.
Go on.
I run a podcast with a colleague and dear friend, Hannah Cormack. It's called Sideshow. We've just started our second season. Our first season was called Activated Arts, but because of all the AA things, we changed it to Sideshow. Also, we're just a bit renegade, so Sideshow sounded good. And we're just coming out with season 2 now, but one of my favourite parts of that podcast is, and radio show that we do with 2RPH, is that we do a what's on, and Hannah is housebound, and every time she talks about what she can access and what she can't access. And I just think the pandemic made us aware that we could do access in a whole lot of different ways.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anthea. Now, Deborah, how did you navigate your career as an artist through the pandemic, and what changes do you see in the performing arts in our post-pandemic world?
Well, like Anthea, in the very early stages with the major lockdowns, I too went into development mode. As you would be aware, with Art Screen, and so it was a matter of writing, and of course there was still, I always collaborate in a team. I think when it comes to performance, you're always collaborating. You have a team, and so it becomes Zoom and such like. And so when we did eventually start to open up, we were at the point of being able to hit the ground running, so to speak, with filming. And we adopted very stringent processes. And what I was deeply humbled by, we had quite significant numbers of people on set. This was down in Wollongong at Anita's Theatre. And everybody was mindful and respectful of the requirements and everybody's safety. We implemented very stringent processes of testing. Nobody complained, and everybody adhered to it. And we actually had a team of nearly 100 people during that filming process, and no one got sick. It was, yes, it was amazing. But I was just really knocked over and, well, I won't say surprised, but really humbled with how everybody was willing to look after everybody else and take responsibility in that sense. And that, for me, was the real take-home message. And that, I think, is something that all communities gain from and strengthen by that notion of being responsible for, it's not just all about me. It's our relationships and our roles and responsibilities with other people. Now, from a post-pandemic thing, well, that's when the real live stuff comes into play. But what I think has happened, which I think is totally brilliant, is people are significantly more aware of issues of access, because one of the things that I was doing during the pandemic was gathering material for future work. And one thing, accessing tweets in chat rooms on disability, and reading people's comments of how they were managing with COVID, with the shutdowns. And somebody said that people are complaining about feeling isolated. Well, maybe now they have some insight for those with disability who experience isolation on a very significant scale for, due to not being able to access areas and such like. And they said, that is a significant lesson that has been learned of the importance of access for all people to things of entertainment, cultural shows, just culture generally. And for me, like doing the festival just recently, I'm really, really, really proud to say that our work was one of very, very few that had all the symbols attached to it. So we had Auslan, we had the hearing loss, we had audio description. And it was just, I was proud of that. Really proud of that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks, Deborah. Now, just to remind you, I can't see right now, but I think we're going to flip over to questions from the audience, both in the room and online, in about 8 minutes. So make sure you get your questions in, otherwise I'll be making up more questions. So
Can we ask them?
Oh, you can ask. Yeah, that's true. I have one more question for each of you, but we'll just need to be aware of the time. So the title of the panel today is Reimagining Performing Arts and Disability. We are currently operating in a time where people with disability are deeply engaged in the arts as both creators, performers, and audiences. So, Anthea, what are your current observations of disability representation and accessibility in theatre? What future changes would you like to see happen in this space?
Yeah, I think there have been some really good changes. It's been wonderful to see some actors, particularly who identify as living with disability, coming out of some of our major drama schools, and some of those people getting great work. I feel a little bit like sometimes it's about people with disability being seen rather than heard, though. I'm really interested in who is behind the crafting of the story. It's not just about who you cast, it's about who crafts that story, who directs it, who edits it, who wrote it. And it seems like there's a little bit less of that. So I think arts organisations, the screen industry, etc., need to think about how to make sure that we're heard, not just seen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks, Anthea. And Jamal, when thinking about stand-up comedy and disability, we are now seeing a growing representation of comedians with disability, both visible and invisible. Issues around disability are used as comedic material, which often functions to break down barriers and destigmatise disability. As a stand-up performer, what have your personal experiences in comedy been in relation to access and representation?
As far as access goes, like everything, it has like its good and bad moments. I would say for the most part, for me and my disability, most things are accessible. And promoters are usually pretty happy to, like, say I get to a show, like I need to know where the stage is and how it's set up and things like that. Most people are happy to give me a quick tour of the stage, and I'll get to the show early to make sure that I can get on and off and all that sort of thing. And so I would say for the most part, it's pretty, people are pretty open-minded in comedy, so they're happy to sort of accommodate and that sort of thing. Access becomes a problem when shows aren't close to like public transport and things like that, and then I have to like outlay money for a taxi or whatever it might be to then get to that show. And then so even though I can get to the show and perform to it, I guess the accessibility isn't being meant in the sense that like my entire check might go on that taxi or whatever. So there, yeah, it has its moments, sort of thing. I guess I don't feel like there's anything preventing me from performing in stand-up comedy, though, as far as like, there's no one standing there saying, okay, this guy can't do this or whatever, anything like that. I do like that it is so open-minded, and like stand-up comedy has a very long history, particularly of working with people with like mental illness. It's almost a requirement. So I feel like, it's like always been a thing. And so, whether people are neurotic or whatever it is, like it's kind of just known in the industry that this is how people, like, we need to adapt to like this, like to the performers. This is how they are. So I feel like I can give it like probably like a B plus for accessibility in comedy. Yeah.
That's very promising. Thanks, Jamal. And Deborah, your work asks audiences to reflect upon their own treatment of people who are considered to be outside the norm. Do you feel the reactions, attitudes and behaviours of the general public around difference and otherness have changed in a post-pandemic world? What are the issues that you see as continued priorities in this space?
That is one heck of a question.
Isn't that a doozy? You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. And counting. Well, I think I partly answered that with my previous answer as regards the awareness of when one isn't able to access things, that the one thing that the pandemic did is made people aware of exclusion, the pain of being socially excluded, socially separated from people. And so hence that increased an awareness that, wait there, and my work, I like to think, encourages empathy by shifting perspective and immersing people into a different world. And so going, whoa, so that's what it's like. And so I would like to think that the pandemic did partly did that of, well, this is what exclusion is like. Don't like it, don't want to go there. Nobody should experience this. Now, post-pandemic, let's hope that lesson isn't forgotten. Which all too often that's what can happen. I would like to think that it doesn't get forgotten. Now, talking about how it would shift, does this mean, I got very excited I love what both of these presenters have been saying today with the notion of representation, that hopefully with this increased understanding of the difficulty and pain of exclusion, that will then lead to a greater awareness of the need for increased representation, of engaging with these stories that we may find uncomfortable, undesirable, or, as I often say, unsexy, because we all know this bill can be seen as unsexy. And then, actually being able to engage in ways that Jamal has suggested of, shall we say, challenging these preconceived ideas of representation, of what people with disability can do, the stories that we have that we can share, but also what we can actually do as performers, as directors, as comedians, and yes, maybe be more willing to give us a go and not just be members of the audience.
Brilliant. Thanks, Deborah. Now, that completes our formal questions to the panel. So we'll open it up to the audience. So remember, we're using Slido. This is our first time using Slido. You can also ask questions from the room if you'd like to do that too. Someone will come to you with a microphone, so you could just raise your arm or indicate to the staff. The first question we have a lot of questions for Jamal. Jamal? So the first question is for Jamal. Do you find audiences are receptive to material about disability, or does it feel like they're reluctant to laugh?
It kind of depends. It depends. Like, I feel like there is, obviously, like, crowds can change night by night depending on, like, what suburb you're in, the venue. Like, even, like, there are some shows where you'll do back-to-back shows in the same venue, and, like, the first audience will be great, the second audience will suck. So it's kind of really hard to judge it. Like, there's no consistency in comedy. It can change, not, like, literally moment by moment. So with that being said, though, I do find that, like, audiences will laugh as long as it's not, like, too As long as if you're talking about something, if you're being really honest and you're like really painting a picture of like a struggle, like it has to pay off. You know what I mean? Like otherwise it'll make them sad, and then they're like, okay, we can't laugh at that. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is. Like it takes a bit of practice to kind of get certain ideas across. There's definitely like how do you say that word? Attitudinal barriers. I like that. That's cool. There is a little bit of that sometimes with the audience. Like sometimes, like someone will see me get on the stage, and you'll hear someone. They'll be like, "That guy's not blind. This is an act." And then it's like, I'll have to, show my credentials, I guess. Like, so sometimes, I guess it's comedy, right? So it's like anything can happen. Like people are silly, so I understand that. Like so sometimes there are like those sorts of things. Yeah, it's really hard to gauge. I guess like if somebody wanted to try it and like different disabilities might be taken differently. Yeah, but I feel like for the most part, like when people come to comedy shows, like they come to comedy shows again with an open mind. Like every now and then you get like some closed-minded people or whatever. But yeah, I think people are mostly going there to have a good time and like they know what the rule is. So
Can I ask a question? Being somebody who is very visibly different,
right.
Jamal, I'm in the situation where I can actually be laughed at just walking down the street.
Right.
So I think what you're getting at is there's a difference between laughing at and laughing with.
Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
Yeah, you definitely have to take control of like what's being laughed at. Like you can definitely like sell yourself out and be like, oh, I'm blind, I trip over. Like you can do that stuff and you'll get laughs and it'll suck. But like, I definitely agree with like, you definitely have to take control over like what people are laughing at. You have to be, I guess like, it's weird, I guess. You take pride in what the joke is, you know what I mean? Take pride in what they're laughing at. Like, it can't be... Like, if it's something you're insecure about, it has to be because you're telling them that, like, it's okay to laugh at this, though. You know? Yeah, you definitely don't want to be, like, punching down on yourself.
No. Thanks, Jamal. We have a question from in the house.
Thanks so much. Fascinating. A few of you talked about how the pandemic gave people who are not disabled or don't have a particular kind of disability insight into like isolation and various experiences. What are the significant or like really notable experiences that disabled people might have when viewing or participating in the performing arts that the pandemic did not give insight for people who don't have that disability into?
Lots of things, lots and lots of things. Yeah. A huge number of things. I feel like that list is endless. I think it gave one very specific experience. And what I really liked was the discussion it opened up around community responsibility. And I never want to see that cultural ad soldier on with Codral ever again. I think it's so toxic. But I don't feel like I'm answering your question. I think I'm saying, so many things. Yeah. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think it would be repeating that idea of engaging with the pain of isolation. But I don't think that actually answers your question appropriately, really.
And I think also, I can't even imagine, I can't imagine how you would, there's a really interesting artist called Eugenie Lee who lives with pelvic pain. And she has made artworks that try to create something akin to that experience. And that's taken her years, and working with a huge number of technology experts, etc. And kind of, but she's a really interesting artist to look at in terms of one very specific thing that she's tried to create understanding and empathy around.
I think I just had the idea that the one thing that the pandemic did do was, again, think about how we can communicate with others, interestingly, in a manner that is very technologically based, and how we can engage people at a distance and tell stories and get messages through. So it was that interesting way of how do we become creative with the technology that we have that can tell stories that sometimes can be difficult to tell when you're not face to face. So.
Do you find that like the being in lockdown made you better writers?
Yes.
Given that there was no like hardly any other outlet to
Absolutely,
work with?
absolutely, yes.
At first. I was so productive lockdown 1, and then lockdown 2, I was just languishing. I just lost the plot.
Right.
No, for me, it definitely made me a better writer. Absolutely, yeah. I finished another PhD in the lockdown as well.
Another, just another.
Oh, just another. Yeah. Just, what? No, but yes, it definitely did make me a better writer.
Do you have any tips for disabled artists on how to find collaborators who are also disabled? Especially when, I can't actually read the rest of that sentence, but I think there's a mention around school, education. I've only got half a message there, but yes. What about...
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Because 90% of disabilities, 80 to 90% of disabilities are invisible. And, I'm dyslexic. No one can tell that. Apart from the fact that I'm really interesting. I also have rheumatoid arthritis that is not necessarily obvious. Sometimes people just think I've sprained my ankle today, or that I had a skiing accident and now I'm in a cast. Definitely not skiing. It's a really, really tricky one. It's also something, I've had arthritis since I was 2, and I used to feel like the only one. And then you get older and everyone else gets disabilities as well. And we're everywhere. And you also become part of community, and people get better talking about it. And, I'm certainly part of that. So I think, how does anyone find their collaborators? It's about finding people who are like-minded. And the majority of my collaborators actually don't live with disability, although probably a lot of them are neurodivergent, and they've only recently realised, because, that's particularly with women, a lot of women were being chronically underdiagnosed. So, I don't know. I think, look, for me, it's just, honestly, I've never dated someone who wasn't neurodivergent. It's just the people I like. It just happens. I don't know. There are definitely Facebook groups, definitely through activated art, through accessible arts. I've met a lot of collaborators who I've really loved working with. But it's happened slowly and through the work.
Well, for me, as you are aware, I've accessed various organisations that present themselves as organisations for artists with disability, and that was very much a conscious decision on our part. And when I say our part, when our team, to actually be as inclusive as possible. Like, for example, when we went down to Wollongong, we made contact with Merigong, and yes, we did various connections, as you were aware, through Art Screen. So for me, it's been a conscious decision and a strategic one, with being knowledgeable of needing to have the experience, the exposure, and the representation. So, yeah, for me it was a conscious strategic decision.
And would you add anything to that, Jamal?
Yeah, I would. So one of my, as I mentioned earlier, one of my friends, Oliver Hunter, he's a stand-up comedian, and he's got cerebral palsy, and I met him at one of the first open mics I went to. So that was just like perfect coincidence, right? But I do think it's because, and we're still great friends. We message all the time. He lives in Melbourne, I live here, but we always, I think we ran into each other just by going to an open mic, right? And it just so happened the first night we were both there, right? But it was going out to these things, like go to the places where your people are going to be. That's what I would say. If you're new to a scene, you don't know anybody, you don't know. Let's say you want to be a stand-up comedian and you have access requirements. Say you're like my friend in a wheelchair, right? You need to find whatever open mic is accessible to you, go to it, and just start talking to all the other open micers and find out what other rooms will be accessible to you. So go to the places where your people are going to be, where your ideal friends or whatever it might be. So that's what I would say.
Terrific. Thank you, Jamal. We're actually pretty much running out of time rapidly. We have time. We have a microphone in the room. We have time for one very brief question, our last question.
I'll just be really quick. I just want to say very quickly, thank you. This has been a very interesting and wonderful experience to come out and listen to you guys. I had a really quick question, which was just about, there's been a lot of rhetoric about us existing post-pandemic and returning to normal and that sort of thing, even though we know normal wasn't functioning. How have you found that maybe places that weren't accessible are adjusting to that? Have you found people who just reverted back to how things used to be? Or are people still taking into account accessibility?
I feel more comfortable asking for what I need in some ways. And I think there is a real groundswell of thinking about that. And I found, because I'm immune compromised, I've found that collaborators are just a lot more aware of saying, let's move today's session onto Zoom because I have, I've got a sniffle, I've got this, and I don't want you to get it. And I don't think they're just doing that for me, I think they're doing that generally. But yeah, I think there's a greater understanding that there are people in the community with vulnerabilities that you have no idea about, and what is a sniffle for me might be far more problematic for them. And I think we're also just really aware of the technology that we have, and so it's not a big deal when suddenly we say, let's move this onto Zoom, or actually I'm really achy this morning, I'm going to Skype into this, or whatever that is, and I think that's really helpful. And also I think with theatre, we've got a lot more understanding of getting things online, and how if you create access around that, it serves a great deal of the community, not just the community with disability, but people with brand new babies that they're breastfeeding, the elderly who maybe can't get from La Perouse to Parramatta for a show in the evening, etc. Yeah, I think those things are coming along. Other things, it's tricky sometimes. Some of our festivals and things are funded by tourism boards, so therefore they don't want things to go online because they want people to come to Adelaide. Well, that's really problematic. Yeah.
And we're going to have to leave it there today. I would like to thank all our panellists for their time and contribution. I would also, yes, a big warm applause. I'd also like to thank Janelle Ryan and the Sydney Opera House for hosting the event. Our delivery partner, Pyrus, for broadcasting this conversation to our online audience members. And of course to our funding partners, Create New South Wales and City of Sydney. We hope that you will all join us for the second event of this series, hosted by the MCA on April the 27th, where we'll be discussing accessible technology and how leading Sydney venues apply digital access for online and in-person visitors. To both our in-person and online audience, I'd like to say thank you for joining this conversation today. And I look forward to seeing you at our next conversation for Access, Ideas and Insights at the MCA on the 27th of April. Thanks very much, everyone.